All over the world, different types of prisons are built to confine criminals of various categories, and each prison has its own rules and methods to keep these criminals in check. While some prisons manage to keep inmates in line by offering tolerable living conditions, others are known for being a hell on earth where inmates are forced to endure extreme torture and starvation. In this video, I will reveal the dark side of prison life by diving deep into the prisons with the worst conditions. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. The Black Dolphin Prison, formerly known as KVD Prison Number 2, is one of the oldest prisons in Russia, located near the border with Kazakhstan. The prison's unique name comes from a dolphin sculpture at its entrance. Legend has it that the dolphin was built by inmates who enjoyed nature's company while sitting on the grass at the prison entrance. Initially, Black Dolphin was a prison reserved for those sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor, but after the Pugachev Rebellion in 1773, the prison was expanded to also confine thieves. In recent times, Black Dolphin has become a feared place where the country's worst criminals, such as serial killers, terrorists, cannibal murderers, and people who commit crimes against children, are held. The prison's security measures are top-notch, making it nearly impossible for inmates to escape. Since it is a prison that houses the worst of the worst criminals, it is easy to understand why additional measures have been taken to ensure these criminals do not return to society. Each inmate is isolated in a cell protected by 3 steel doors. Each cell is equipped with a 24-hour surveillance camera, allowing authorized officers to monitor what happens in the prison at all times. From the moment they wake up in the morning until they go to bed, inmates are required to stand and are not allowed to sit or rest on their bunks. Guards make rounds every 15 minutes to supervise inmates and ensure they comply with the rules. Inmates remain locked in their cells most of the day, only allowed to exercise in a large room for 90 minutes a day. During this exercise period, each cell is searched for illegal items and weapons. Inmates are only allowed to possess books, newspapers, and a radio. Anything else is considered illegal. Interaction between inmates at Black Dolphin is minimal since there is no cafeteria in the prison. Inmates are fed 4 times a day in their cells, and their meals consist of soup and bread. Black Dolphin uses a unique method to move inmates from one point to another within the facility. First, the guards blindfold the inmates to ensure they do not have a full view of the prison that would allow them to plan escapes. Then, the inmates are forced to bend at the waist with their hands cuffed behind their backs. The guards hold the handcuffs to guide the inmates to their destination. This method is used to prevent inmates from getting a proper view of their surroundings and to avoid attacks on guards or other inmates. Another peculiarity of Black Dolphin is that inmates are required to respond, "Yes, sir," when interacting with guards. A notable inmate of Black Dolphin was the German actress Carol Neighbor, who died in the prison in 1942. Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, Kenya. Kenyan prisons are often known for their inhumane living conditions, but Kamiti, located in the Roysambu constituency, is considered the worst of all. It was built to hold 1,400 inmates, but now houses more than 3,600, more than double its capacity. Overcrowding in the prison has caused severe deterioration in the health of many inmates. The spread of serious diseases such as gonorrhea, syphilis, tuberculosis, dysentery, and HIV is very common in Kamiti due to the unsanitary environment. Inmates have to live in dilapidated buildings and overcrowded cells, with a constant lack of basic sanitary requirements. Living conditions are worsened by the constant lack of water, as there is no reliable source within the prison. About 200 inmates are forced to carry buckets of water every day to at least stay clean. Some sections of the prison are particularly notorious for the type of brutality that exists within them. Block G is a section full of sexual predators who prey on the weak for their pleasure. These predators may be able to get away with their heinous activities due to the prison's overpopulation. The city prison became famous for another reason in November 2008, when a search revealed a gruesome fact about the inmates. It was discovered that the inmates of Block A had been operating what could be called an illegal call center. It turned out that many of the inmates possessed mobile phones that they used for large-scale scams. The phones were of a specific brand made with a special voice-changing feature that allowed these criminals to alter their voices when calling unsuspecting victims, pretending to be women or children in need. They even went as far as faking accents to make their victims believe the lies they were telling. The inmates would then build a relationship with the victim and maintain the ruse until they managed to extort them. When not making calls, the inmates sent dubious text messages to many Kenyans, hoping for an unfortunate person to take the bait. At other times, the inmates would call people claiming to be from the local radio station and somehow convince the person to give up their ATM details. There are rumors that these criminals had the help of some guards who took a share of the money from the scams. The fact that the guards helped the inmates with their illegal businesses explains the prevalence of scams in the prison. Dozens of Kenyans have been victims of these elaborate scams, losing their life savings to hardened criminals who could not be stopped by the prison bars. The city prison made headlines again in November 2009 when 8 inmates died due to a cholera outbreak. In 2021, it was reported that 3 inmates had escaped from the prison and 7 guards were subsequently arrested for helping them escape. Terre Haute Penitentiary, USA. The United States Penitentiary, Terre Haute, is a high-security federal prison designated for male inmates. USP Terre Haute is constructed with multiple security levels consisting of maximum, medium, and low security units. In July 1993, the federal government assigned USP Terre Haute the execution of inmates sentenced to death. A few years later, the prison was reformed to house the Special Confinement Unit, where death row inmates are held before their execution. In 1999, all federal death row inmates were transferred from other federal and state prisons to USP Terre Haute. The federal government chose this prison as the federal death row center for males due to its central location in the country. Although they have been sentenced to death, the inmates of USP Terre Haute are allowed to work at Unicor, an industry based in the prison that produces towels and other accessories for the military. Each inmate can earn between $6 and $12 daily. However, the confinement conditions of these men have been a subject of debate worldwide. In 2008, the ACLU accused USP Terre Haute of having inadequate living conditions in the Special Confinement Unit. The ACLU claimed that death row inmates did not receive adequate medical and mental health services. They also stated that the inmates had to endure incessant noise that deprived them of sleep. At Terre Haute, inmates are individually confined in small cells and spend most of their time alone, but they have the opportunity to talk to each other through the front of their cells. They are allowed out of their cells 3 times a week for exercise and recreation, but they must do so in a cage and not outdoors. There is a significant restriction on communication between the inmates and the outside world. Inmates have only 7 days of visitation per month, and all mail they receive is reviewed, copied, and evaluated before delivery. Another restriction on communication is that all inmates are required to speak in English in all conversations. Since its inception, Terre Haute has witnessed the execution of 16 men, including Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. The prison currently houses notable criminals like Joe Kartsarnev, aka the Boston Marathon bomber, whose death sentence has been reinstated. The harsh conditions faced by the inmates are important to mention. USP Terre Haute was the first federal prison to consider offering psychological and psychiatric treatments to inmates. It is also one of the few prisons where inmates are referred to by their names instead of their numbers. In 2021, Terre Haute recorded the highest number of COVID-19 cases among other federal prisons, with about 281 inmates testing positive for the virus, including death row inmates in isolation. Around 14 of the 50 death row inmates were infected, likely coming into contact with the virus through prison staff. San Quentin, USA. San Quentin Prison is California's oldest prison, built due to the rise in crime in San Francisco between 1848 and 1852. The state witnessed an influx of fortune seekers, which in turn caused a rise in crime. As more criminals were arrested, the city jail reached its limit and even became overcrowded to the point that some inmates were held on a ship for a brief period before the government decided to build a prison. San Quentin Prison was originally built to house 250 inmates, but that number was easily surpassed in no time. Initially, the prison was handed over to private investors who won the contract to manage the facility. These people were supposed to maintain the prison, and in return, they were allowed to hire out inmates to various businesses. But over time, the prison was mismanaged, and inmates were subjected to harsh living conditions. The inmates were treated in the most inhumane way, and suffered brutal punishments such as flogging and being sprayed with water from a high-pressure hose. At some point, prison security was so poor that over 880 inmates escaped in a year, leading the government to forcibly take over management of the prison. San Quentin has been home to criminals of all kinds, including Sirhan Sirhan, the man who assassinated Robert F. Kennedy. It is the death row center for men sentenced to death in California, while women facing capital punishment are housed at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. San Quentin's death row is divided into three sections. The first is North Segregation, reserved for compliant inmates who are less likely to cause trouble. Next is the East Block, which basically houses the majority of death row inmates. Then there is the Adjustment Center, which contains the worst of the worst criminals who need to be handled differently from the others. In December 2015, San Quentin's death row housed over 700 male inmates, making it the largest death row in the United States. In 2001, the prison's death row was considered the largest in the Western Hemisphere, and in 2005 it was said to be the most populated execution anteroom in the United States. It also houses California's only gas chamber. 3 years after the state's governor ended capital punishment, San Quentin's death row began the process of closing in early 2022. All death row inmates are being relocated to normal cells. Diyarbakir, Turkey. Diyarbakir prison in Turkey was created in 1980 by the Ministry of Justice. However, control of the prison was handed over to the military administration following the Turkish coup of September 12, 1980. Under military administration, Diyarbakir became a martial law military prison known for applying some of the worst types of punishment. Diyarbakir prison was built to house 744 inmates. But over the years, it became overcrowded, and by 1996, it had 942 inmates. Between 1981 and 1984, in addition to overcrowding, inmates had to endure horrible and inhumane torture. This period is popularly known as the period of barbarism, or the Hell of Diyarbakir. Prison guards had permission to strip inmates, beat them, and pull their hair mercilessly. Sometimes they would blindfold them, strip them naked, and give them high-pressure hose baths. The prison used prolonged isolation as a method of torture, and guards constantly insulted and threatened inmates with death. The prison captain, Esat Oktay Yildirim, had a German shepherd named Joe, and all inmates were required to salute it. They had no choice but to salute the animal, as it had been trained to bite the private parts of unruly inmates. Among the many forms of torture used were sleep deprivation, as well as deprivation of food and water for long periods. Sometimes the guards would whip the inmates on the soles of their feet or hang them by their arms. Other times they forced them to stand for long periods or perform strenuous exercises in very unpleasant temperatures. Other torture techniques used included suffocation, sexual humiliation, crushing limbs and genitals, and forcing naked inmates to lie on top of each other. Electric shocks to the genitals, burning flesh with cigarettes, and pulling out healthy nails and teeth were also common. The guards had absolute control and did not hesitate to unleash hell. Occasionally, guards forced inmates to urinate on each other, and in other cases, guards would go as far as raping or threatening to rape inmates, even in the presence of their families. During the period of barbarism, it was common for prison guards to use various terms like disco, welcome, theater, and bath as code names for different torture techniques. The term disco was used when an inmate was forced to bathe in the sewer. Next, the captain gave instructions to the guards to prepare a bath for the new prisoner and then take him to the dormitory. What the prisoner did not know was that he was about to experience torture. The guards started by beating him before dragging him to a bathtub filled with human excrement, where he was left for the following hours. The tortures at Diyarbakir were so severe that 34 inmates lost their lives due to the torture during the period of barbarity. Diyarbakir is considered one of the most notorious prisons in the world, but in 2021, the Turkish president announced plans to convert it into a cultural center. Mendoza Prison, Argentina. The Mendoza prison is plagued by overcrowding, as it currently houses 3 times its original capacity. Overcrowding is a common problem in Argentine prisons, but Mendoza is the worst of all. Many prisoners in Argentina live in devastating conditions due to overcrowding, which often leads to riots in the prisons and violent attacks among inmates, resulting in an increasing number of deaths. In Mendoza, 5 inmates are crammed into a tiny cell measuring a few square feet. Besides being cramped, there are not enough mattresses for the inmates, meaning that they have to sleep on the cold floor. The state of Mendoza prison came to light in 2005 when Amnesty International reported on the conditions of the inmates. They pointed out that the prison's sewage system was in terrible condition, forcing inmates to use plastic bags and bottles when they needed to relieve themselves. With the sewage system in ruins, it is reported that Mendoza inmates are at risk of contracting numerous diseases related to contamination and lack of hygiene. Their situation is worsened by the fact that the prison only calls doctors and nurses after an inmate has died. Inmates do not have medical records and do not receive medical care unless the case is considered critical. There is a shortage of medications in the prison, and inmates who desperately need to see a doctor have to go to extraordinary lengths, like cutting themselves, to receive medical attention. When doctors finally arrive, they are not allowed to enter the prison wards. Amnesty International also reported that prison guards used to beat inmates every time they searched the cells for illegal items. The beatings increased when the guards tried to maintain discipline among the inmates. It was also reported that 14 prisoners aged between 18 and 21 decided to protest against the ill treatment by sewing their lips shut to attract the government's attention. This act demonstrates the suffering endured by Mendoza inmates. According to the Argentine Constitution, prisons must be clean, safe, and healthy. In general, prisons are meant for rehabilitation and not for punishment. However, the case of Mendoza inmates is different, as the few who manage to come out alive leave the prison in worse conditions than when they entered. Apart from the mentioned problems, Mendoza also stands out for the fact that many inmates have not yet been tried or convicted. Despite not being found guilty, these inmates have no choice but to endure the inhumane conditions in the hope of one day being released. Besides their chilling findings, Amnesty International is also concerned that since the year 2000, dozens of inmates have died due to violence in Argentine prisons, and only a few of these incidents have been investigated by the government. Goldani Prison, Georgia. Goldani Prison, located in Tbilisi, Georgia, attracted international attention due to a torture scandal that came to light in September 2012. The citizens of the country were shocked when several videos surfaced showing prison guards and their superiors sexually abusing and torturing inmates. For a long time, it had been reported that guards mistreated inmates at Goldani, but these remained allegations until the leaked videos confirmed they were true. Thanks to a whistleblower, the country was able to see firsthand the atrocities being committed in the prison. The videos were released by Vladimir Bedukadze, a 35-year-old prison officer. After exposing the wrongdoings of his colleagues at Goldani, Vladimir fled to Belgium for his safety. Initially, he was sought in connection with the abuse case, but prosecutors eventually released him, considering his immense contribution to uncovering the grave crimes being committed in the prison. The videos contain scenes of sexual abuse and rape using broomsticks and police batons. In the first video, a total of 10 guards were seen physically and verbally abusing the inmates. In a second video, a prisoner was ordered to remove his underwear and do as he was told. While he was taking them off, the guard began insulting and spitting on him. After a while, the guard referred to the man he was abusing as a dirty thief. The video ended with the man being forced to write something akin to a speech as the guard dictated it to him. In the third video, an Armenian inmate was seen tightly bound to a cell bar, cursing at the prison guards. The video then showed another prisoner with his face covered, begging the guards not to film him while they mocked and humiliated him. Responding to his pleas, they laughed at him, saying, "I am a thief by law." In a final video shot at the Juvenile Detention Center, inmates were physically abused and forced to proclaim themselves as thieves by law. Guards threatened to rape them if they did not comply. Unfortunately, these videos reached the public before reaching the government. Several groups immediately started various protests across the country. The government was forced to investigate the matter and put an end to the abuse at Goldani Prison. The prison was back in the spotlight when the country's former president was imprisoned there. Various protest groups took to the streets, some for and some against the release of the former president. ADX Florence. ADX Florence, also known as Alcatraz of the Rockies, is one of the most secure prisons in the United States, and no one has ever managed to escape from there. The facility was designed to house the worst types of criminals considered a danger to the country or other inmates. The extreme security measures used in this prison have been the subject of debate and lawsuits for some time. However, these measures were implemented to ensure that the hardened criminals locked up there never return to society to cause more harm. The prison houses criminals such as the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski and Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the World Trade Center bombing. The inmates at ADX Florence remain isolated for 23 hours a day without being able to see or interact with anyone. They are also not allowed any form of human contact. Each prisoner is locked in individual cells for at least their first 3 years there. For 1 hour a day, inmates can exercise their bodies in a small, covered underground pit that resembles an empty swimming pool. The pit is so small that it only takes 10 steps to cross it in a straight line and 31 steps to walk around it in a circle. The inmates do not know where they are or what surrounds them since they cannot go out to the yard. Each cell in the prison is built with proper planning to ensure the safety of the inmates. The cells contain a bed, a desk, and a stool, mostly made of poured concrete. Each cell also contains a toilet, a sink, and a shower designed exclusively to ensure the inmate's safety. The shower operates with a timer, meaning the water cuts off after a short period to prevent inmates from flooding their cells. Each cell measures 7 by 12 feet with a 4 by 4 window that allows inmates to see only the sky and rooftops. Inmates can tell what time of day it is by looking out the window, but they do not know what their surroundings are like. This window placement has played a significant role in ensuring that no inmate has been able to plan an escape because they know nothing about their immediate surroundings. For additional security, the prison is equipped with cameras and motion detectors, and every corner of the facility is monitored 24 hours a day. There are a total of 100 doors in the prison, and each one is controlled from a control room that is never left unattended. In the event of an escape attempt or chaos, all doors are immediately locked by pressing a panic button in the control room, and the doors remain locked until the issue is resolved. Many human rights activists have filed lawsuits against ADX Florence for the conditions in which inmates are kept. Unlike other prisons where inmates face poor living conditions and physical torture, ADX Florence was carefully planned to mentally break the hardened criminals it houses. It has been said that keeping inmates in solitary confinement for up to 3 years has caused severe mental damage to the prisoners. Camp 14, Kaechon, North Korea. The Kaechon internment camp, or Camp 14, is a labor camp in North Korea reserved for political prisoners and their families. The official name of the prison is Kwanlee-so No. 14, and it sits on about 155 square miles of land. The camp contains farms, mines, and factories where inmates are forced to work. About 15,000 people are imprisoned in Kaechon's internment camps. There are overcrowded barracks for men, women, and children, as well as administrative buildings and housing for guards. The people imprisoned in Camp 14 are those the North Korean government has classified as politically unreliable. These people are considered enemies of the state and include government officials who did not do their jobs well, people suspected of participating in anti-government activities, and anyone who criticized the government. The sad thing about Camp 14 is that not only are the supposed offenders imprisoned here, but also their families, including children. The camp enforces a policy known as 3 generations of punishment, meaning that for every crime committed, the offender's relatives up to the 3rd generation must pay the price. Children born in the camp are not considered free citizens, regardless of not being in the world when their parents were imprisoned. These children are born directly into the camp's hardships and have no idea what life is like outside of it. Prisoners are forced to work in agriculture, coal mines, textile production, and food, paper, shoe, cement, ceramic, and rubber factories. Prisoners have the option to raise livestock because it gives them the opportunity to steal food meant for the animals. When prisoners are not working as slaves, they starve and are constantly tortured for minor offenses. Only one person has managed to escape from Camp 14 since it was built. Shin Dong-hyuk was 23 years old when he managed to escape from the prison, but had to climb over his friend's corpse and pass through an electrified fence to reach freedom. The hard-earned freedom was, however, a new concept for Shin, as he was born in the camp and had only known hunger, forced labor, and constant beatings throughout his life. To top it off, he did not understand the meaning of family and love, as his environment had forced him to consider his family as his competition for food. After escaping, Shin managed to enter China and from there moved to South Korea before settling in the United States. Judging by the fact that he grew up in an environment as harsh as Camp 14, it can be said that Shin Dong-hyuk took some time to adjust to life outside the camp. He remains the only person born and raised in a North Korean prison camp to escape. Gitarama Prison, Rwanda. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda is considered one of the deadliest and most overcrowded in the world. The prison houses about 7,000 inmates when it was originally built to contain only 600. The overcrowding was a consequence of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, in which about 800,000 people died within 100 days. All individuals suspected of the horrendous crimes were immediately detained and imprisoned in Gitarama. The rapid overcrowding of the prison led to the death of more than 1,000 inmates in 1995. The lack of adequate living conditions, health care, and the use of dirty toilets caused the limbs of other inmates to rot. Inmates spend many hours standing barefoot in whatever small space they can find, as the lack of space does not allow them to sit or sleep comfortably. This continuous stay in unsanitary conditions causes the feet of many inmates to rot and eventually be amputated. The acute lack of adequate medical care and the frequency of diseases in this prison have led to a mortality rate of about 8 inmates per day. The mortality rate in the prison is also affected by the endless violence among inmates. Hunger and starvation in the facility have turned many inmates into cannibals who have resorted to killing the weak and eating their flesh to stay alive. Gitarama has become a kind of jungle, as inmates now act with a mentality of eat or be eaten. Over the years, various human rights organizations have raised many objections about the inhumane conditions in which Gitarama inmates have to live. Sadly, these pleas have continued to fall on deaf ears, as nothing has been done to alleviate the suffering of the inmates. Despite the media being filled with bad stories about Gitarama Prison, Rwanda has spoken out to refute all such reports, calling them media fabrications. A spokesperson claimed that the prison was overcrowded due to the number of suspects and limited infrastructure. However, reports of extreme conditions and cannibalism are pure inventions. Contrary to this claim, former Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs Sir Jeremy Hanley stated that the International Committee of the Red Cross believes that more than 2,000 deaths have occurred in 13 Rwandan prisons. They also believe that these deaths were caused by overcrowding and health problems, with Gitarama recording the highest number of deaths in Rwandan prisons. Another Red Cross member, Brigitte Troyon, stated that the conditions in which inmates are kept are completely inhumane and urgently need improvement. If cannibalism has indeed become a means of survival in Gitarama, mortality rates will continue to rise if nothing is done about the state of the prison. People should be afraid to enter any kind of prison, but in reality, these prisons should be avoided at all costs. In many other prisons, inmates are rehabilitated and leave as better citizens. However, those who serve time in these will most likely come out worse than when they entered. Thanks for staying until the end. See you in the next edition. If you liked the video, give us a like and always remember to subscribe to The Daily Astonishing.